Coach Richey, welcome to Last Call. How are you today?
Doing good. Appreciate you having me on.
No, we're fired up. We're fired up. We're working on this piece where for Speakeasy, where we're really all about our connection, and we're trying to build our connection so that we can able to have great relationships with people. And so one of the first people I wanted to get on here was you, because I feel like you attack the game in such a different way. Just fired up to have you on here. Talk to me a little bit. I mean, you've obviously had so much success there, 111 wins, and your time as a head coach. If you had to really look at one factor that you felt like really propelled you to be that successful, what would you say it was?
I would actually say losing and failure. I think that I was an assistant for 11 seasons, and a lot of times as assistants, you want to obviously be in winning programs and you want to win championships. For me, I was only a part of two winning seasons in my 11 years as an assistant. And so that was nine losing seasons where basically I was at two programs that were both on rebuild situations. And, Charleston Southern, our first year there, we won like seven games maybe. And so we had to build that up in a 5 year period. And then I came to Furman, and we started to we had to build that, and then Nico got here, and it was 4 years where we basically had to just tear the whole thing down and build it back up. And so I was a part of not just losing, but losing in two programs where we had good plans to figure out how to get it there. And it was two completely different plans at both spots. But I feel like going through that just really prepared me, because you just, you weren't able to just kind of, grace through and just be a part of something that was on a little bit more of easier terrain. And so had to solve a lot of problems and had to find a lot of solutions in the midst of adversity. And I think that, prepared me at the age 34 to be able to take over a program.
Yeah, you and I both took over programs at really, really young ages, so we have that commonality. Talk to me a little bit just about the plan you guys had at Charleston Southern and trying to rebuild that program, and then we'll kind of dive into the plan you had at Furman and how those are probably linked in some ways. Some of the things you probably learned at the previous spot.
So Charleston Southern was a deal where we had to battle having basically the smallest venue in Division One athletics. And I think it's sad, about 850 attendees, and it's just a small square, shoebox gym. You've got, five rows on one side, and you got, 10 rows on the other, and then shallow end zones. And so we had to get through that. And, it was a deal where in that situation, it's like, well, how will we win here? And what do we do with this facility? So, we tried to make the facility as nice as we could. And then second, we realized like it was a shooter's gym. It was tight, you had walls on the back. And so it was about the time where the dribble drive was just getting started. It wasn't really popular at that point. And we decided, hey, look, let's space the floor. Let's figure out a way, instead of trying to be as big as everybody else. We said, hey, let's be 2 or 3 inches shorter, but let's never walk on a court and be less skilled. Instead of trying to be the same size, but then we had less skill, let's try to elevate our skill, and then maybe we'll be a little shorter. But with us being shorter, let's go be a little faster. Let's make sure we have speed. Let's play a little bit more of an open floor game. And then the other decision we made, Jamie, and that was quite interesting was, the thing when you have tough facility spots, a lot of times you say, well, hey, we're not going to get the player that other people are going to get, so we got to go JUCO, or we got to go, we got to go to different avenues, right? And that was kind of the mold at Charleston Southern previously. And we decided actually to go back to the high school model and really seeing again, like, hey, a Jamarco Warren that's 5'10", but he can score at all three levels. If he was 6 feet, if he was 6'1", even probably be a high major player. People aren't taking him because he's too small. Hey, let's take him. And then now we got 4 years with him instead of having 2 years with him. And so we did that. And, we signed, I think, 5 of the top 9 players in school history in terms of scoring: Jamarco Warren, Jeremy Sexton, Arlon Harper, Kelvin Martin, Sod Nimley. And all those guys, for the most part, were like a position down, but they could all score the ball, and they all, they all brought something that was pretty exciting to what we were doing. So I would say, figured out the facility, brought a system that fit the institution, but also that we felt like would give us a realistic recruiting model that we could be successful there. And then with that, like, recruited, just crazy. Just nonstop recruiting, and really, not allowing ourselves to get sucked in all the reasons why we couldn't, which can really pull your energy down. But really just saying, hey, we're gonna recruit our way through this, but we're also going to give ourselves a realistic recruiting plan that we can be successful in.
Yeah, I always tell people, you take over a new job, you're going to recruit yourself out of that problem.
Right.
And so figuring out how to recruit, like, and I would always say, we're always going to recruit ourselves out of this.
That's right.
And some of it is figuring out what fits there, maybe what hasn't been done there, or what was done in the past with a limited amount of success. So you take that on to Furman. What kind of things did you take with you, taking over that opportunity? And what kind of things did you learn from the previous?
So Furman was a lot different. Came here in 2011, and they had just won, I think, 21 or 22 games. Jeff Jackson had been here 5 seasons, and he had signed a 4-year extension. And my wife was from Greenville, and so we had just had our first child. We were looking to expand the family, and just thought it was, I knew we had left Charleston Southern in a great spot, and they were built to continue to win. And it was the new challenge, right? It was a different league. It was the academic component. It was, a deal where I was bringing my wife back to our hometown, which was very appealing to us. And so we did it, and got up here, and the thing that I took was, hey, same thing. Like, you got to recruit, right? Like, you got to get on the road. We got to find players, because they had won 22 games, but they had like 5 seniors, and then that next team was going to have like 4 seniors. So 9 of the 13 scholarships were tied up off that 22 win team in the top 2 classes. And so we really had to start recruiting. And that's what I did a lot in my first year. I had to figure out, like, the pitch was completely different. The sell was completely different. And, that was definitely a learning curve for me. But we ended up signing Stephen Kroon in that class, who ended up being SoCon Player of the Year, during his senior year. And then the second year recruited again. And then we ended up signing Chris Acox, who ended up being an all-league player, Nico's, I think, 3rd year. So recruit, right? I mean, that's obviously consistent, but recruiting is such a general term. And I think sometimes as coaches, we get lost in the generality of it. Recruiting specifically to the institution in a way that there's gettability and there's ways that you can win at the place you're at, and being able to identify that, right? And I think that's a huge deal. But then all of a sudden, one of the hardest things I ever went through in my life, looking back, which we see that in what we feel like is short-term failure and misery a lot, that some of the hardest things become some of the best things, but we got to let go. And I was 29 years old. My wife was at home, taking care of our 2 young kids. At that point, we're 3 and 1. And I'll never forget it. Got brought in right before the conference tournament and was told we were fired. And, it was one of those things where there was a lot of uncertainty with it. And, I was actually just telling one of my friends this weekend that I became a different coach after that happened. And it became a deal, like this thing you hear a lot, like, man, how much different does it feel now that you're a head coach, the responsibility of winning and losing? Let me tell you something. After I got fired, okay, as an assistant, it all felt the same, right? Like those 4 years I worked with Nico, the responsibility that I took to try to impact winning and losing is the same that I felt the last 5 as a head coach, because you get that call and you get brought in that room and you just realize, like, there's no time for bad work in this deal. And so it was one of those situations where I had to figure out, like, what was I going to do? Every mentor I had was telling me to leave here. Every one of them, all conventional wisdom, said, hey, you can't win at Furman, get out of there, like, go. And I had another opportunity. There was more money, and it was at a place that conventionally definitely won more and made, like, it had all the checks. If you're doing pros and cons, it was like, hey, all the checks are right here. You need to go. And I remember Nico flew in. Nico and I did not know each other. And we went to dinner one night, and I just asked him his vision at Furman. And there was a lot of alignment of what I had thought in our 2 years, that if we did this correctly, you could win here. And so I just told my wife, I said, look, I know everybody thinks that we're supposed to leave, but me being a person of faith and me trying to do this, obviously wanting to win, but also more importantly to have impact, I just thought there was a great opportunity in seeing it finished out, right? And not just running to the next thing. And so for less money and a lot of different wisdom telling me to do something else, I really prayed about it a ton and really just took a bunch of walks. And, I was compelled on it. I was convicted that, hey, I'm supposed to stay here. And I really look back on that, Jamie, and like, I don't think I'm a head coach at 34 had I made the decision to go conventional wisdom. In fact, that staff got let go 2 years later, sight unseen, right? Like nobody saw it coming. And so stayed with Nico, and we put the plan in place, and it was hard. It was difficult. It was a convicted model to start to mirror the institution more, as opposed to creating a subculture away from the academic identity. It was actually a decision to go closer towards it, and to bring in, instead of having a subculture, create a culture here that actually took pride in the academics of the institution, and to go win because of academics, not lose in spite of academics. And we went 7 wins, 11 wins, 19 wins, 23 wins, and so it was a nice progression. And then in 2017, Nico went to Drake, and I became head coach here.
Yeah, I remember, watching those things. Now, so you and I have so many mutual friends, and I remember talking to you on the road, around guys like Mike Morrell and stuff, and just how convicted you were, just that you guys were going to be able to get that done, and just having that vision. That's one of the things I'll say. Like, even when you were an assistant, never felt like you didn't have conviction that you guys had a plan in place to get it done. And then, kudos to the institution for giving you that kind of time to be able to contribute to that vision. When you talk about mirroring the institution, what are some things that you guys put into place when you were recruiting? Some things you put into place when you brought the guys in culturally?
Well, it was one of those deals where, it's this idea that, like, what other entity in the world brings in people that don't have passion for the greater of the institution and expects them to perform well, right? Like, we only do that in sport. Okay. Like, you're not doing that in the military. You're not doing that in a Fortune 500 company. You're not bringing people in that right off the top you had to make an exception for, or don't really buy into what the institution stands for. Like, every single other circle is this word passion, and it's this word identity, and it's this word culture. And it's like, okay, well, it's a scary thought to say, well, this is going to cut our pull down even more from the type of players that we're going to be able to recruit. Like, this is really, at that point, we're getting transcripts off fax machines. So we used to always say that the fax machine was like the biggest filter of our program, right? Like, it just naturally filtrated because of the academic standard here. And now, we're going to put another filter on this. And so how are we going to do this, right? And that's the scary part of it. It's like you're knocking down your options. But at the same point, that's the convicted part, that we're going to funnel this thing so tight that we only need to sign 3 people a year. And we're going to get people that at this point, like, the academics here are real. It's a top 50 liberal arts school in the country. So let's get people, instead of hiding it, saying, oh, well, let's not talk about that. Let's get people that want that. And then with that, you're probably going to have some common traits in terms of work ethic, in terms of high potential individuals that want to find excellence, that want to be great, that aren't trying to shortcut around it. But there's, okay, so now, well, how does that fit in to how we're going to operate from a basketball team? And so now you're looking for, tough, skilled, smart. Hey, let's bring the cerebral model of what we think we're going to draw. And then let's also tailor how we play off of that, right? And that's where it was the whole idea of let's look complicated but be simple. Let's utilize our skill. Let's utilize our the people that want to come to Furman. That, hey, maybe we got to think the game a little bit more and play more of a read-based type offense. And so you start mixing it, right? And then you start saying, okay, where are the territories of that? Where are some schools that have done this before? And we kind of benchmarked, from the Bob McKillips of the world at Davidson, even to a little bit an extent, the Rick Byrd of Belmont, and looking at these different programs and seeing how are they doing it. And it wasn't identical, but there were a lot of similarities of how we did it. And so you just look at that very first class from Jeff Beans, Daniel Fowler, Devin Sibley, John Davis. They just showed up to campus with an unbelievable amount of pride and saying, hey, we chose Furman and we're going to Furman. And that was back in, that class was 2014. That spring was completed. Now you fast forward 8 years later, we have 2 guys in those 8 years that have played, finished eligibility, are now on staff for us, right? That's the amount of pride that they have in the institution. And that was just a critical component of what I think has created, what now has been the last 5 years inside the top 100.
Yeah, I think what's great about what you're talking about is like really doing what most people are, like you said, are afraid to do. When you look at Steve Jobs and you study guys like that, like I know you do, it wasn't about trying to fit everybody, but it was about trying to fit the right person and the right people that are attracted to your kind of product. And in a lot of ways, when you start doing that, the attraction runs to you. You start running into those that maybe you wouldn't have run into before. Now, I want to ask you this because you've done a great job of keeping your group diverse. And I think that can be really challenging in an academic setting. When you look at academic schools around the country, that's something everyone's trying to figure out. A lot of times when you talk about finding the perfect fit, it does include a level of exclusivity. And I think you've done an unbelievable job of keeping a really, really diverse group of guys that are able to play together and are able to attack it. How are some ways that you've been able to do that at such an academic place and still continue to build your program?
Just because it's something that's very, very important to me. I mean, that's the easy answer. Like you, as the leader of the organization, you just make it happen, right? Like you don't there you look deliberately at ways to do that, and you make sure that I want, especially in today's world, like any part that we can do to show unity, right, and to show the ability to work together, and really in a place that offers an incredible opportunity when they leave here. We're very deliberate with it. I mean, that's really, there's no other explanation for it besides the fact that we think about it. We look at the roster, we look at recruiting classes, and we make sure that at the end of the day, like I want this to be a diverse group. I think that's the beauty of the opportunity, and you can do it. You know what I mean? Like you can do it. You can make it happen. I think you can't be afraid to have these conversations of like, hey, if we have two scholarships, like this is something we want to be aware of, right? And like that doesn't mean you necessarily take a less player. We always want to make sure we're hitting the standard of the type of player, the type of person we're getting. You just broaden the net, right? It just and you know how it is, Jamie. And like a lot of times the answer is like you just got to work a little bit, not necessarily harder, but you just got to work a little smarter to make sure that, hey, if this is something important to us, let's make sure we get this done.
Yeah, I think, and again, I think you've done a great job of it, and I give you a ton of credit for that. When I watch your teams play, you've done an amazing job of that, and I think people don't realize so much how many times in these recruiting decisions, it really comes down to one or two factors, one way or the other. What are some factors that you see most commonly that kind of help you to decide between one player versus another?
Yeah, that would be a whole
Both both good players, both good players.
that'd be a
So,
whole podcast.
well, let's dive into it some, and we can contribute and fly
So,
around a little bit.
so we talk about tiebreakers a lot. I think tiebreakers are a big deal. One thing that we talk about, and this is not a statement of arrogance at all. This is just how we want to view the process of it. We use the word selectivity much more than we use the word recruiting, right? This is a selection process, and that's the beauty of being at Furman. There's a lot of people that can play here, right? And it's about selecting the right people. And so a lot of that is, you got different lists, right? Like we've obviously got the academic piece that we have to meet. We've got the character component that we want to have here, that it really is important to our culture, making sure that we find people that, understand the idea of sacrifice, understand the idea of team, understand how we're going to play. And then you also have the talent piece, right? That you can't necessarily avoid, that you got to make sure you hit there. So you've got those three buckets. One thing I've gotten into big here recently, and this is something that's pretty funny because I was never this type of person. Like in terms of, I was a business major in college. I took Myers-Briggs. Enneagram, all that stuff. I don't like it, so I'm gonna preface all this by saying this. I do not like that stuff because it makes me think that like God's upstairs on an assembly line. He's got nine buckets of all of us, and like we're just, hey, he's a one, he's a four, he's a five. And my personality, I don't really like that. I don't like to feel like I'm squeezing into saying, hey, you can just label it and this is what it is. But a couple years ago, I really got into the Chad Brown deal with Profile, and we've been using it the last 2 years. And he's really helped me understand that it's not the answer key, and you can't look at it as such. But the cool part about his deal is it's three tests in one, basically, where you've got behaviors in the disc profile, but then you've got the values, and then you got the motives. And so really it's not just having the profile in terms of like the behavior assessment. you're really getting to merge those three things: behaviors, values, motives, and you're getting a really clear picture of what you're getting from the personality side. And so we've gotten into that. That's been one of our newer, probably, I would say, tiebreaker assessments that we'll look and see. And again, there's not like this bad deal, like, hey, well, this is a bad one. Like you see it's not necessarily that. It's more so this puzzle piece, how does it fit with the rest of it? From a basketball standpoint, we're going to lean on skill. We're going to, it's one of those things. I've got two easy rules in recruiting at the top of the chart. The first one is, if I don't like you, don't recruit them. And like, that sounds really like, well, man, that seems really simplified. But we talk about this idea of culture, and everybody in the business is like, that's the first thing. Like, nobody wants to hear about it, right? Oh, that's just, everybody talks about it. Well, the reason everybody hates the word culture is because it's the most overused word in the business and the least understood. When you're looking at culture, when you're looking at it from a business standpoint, and business usually runs 3 to 5 years ahead of sport, you're looking at this idea of retention, but you're also looking from an idea of connectivity before they walk in the door. Like, how is this going to work to where is it our culture is just going to like saran wrap these people into this form of exactly what we want? Like, that's where I feel like your arrogance can get in the way of it. There's a certain level of like personality and, like, how can we get along here, right? That is going to attribute to that culture more than we realize. So if we're getting on the phone with somebody and we're getting to know them and like, it's just not meshing, right? It's just not gelling. Well, in the sake of talent, we say, well, we just got to do it, right? We just put our head down. So for us, like, if we don't feel like that we like them, we're gonna have to be around them every single day. We'll cut them, right? And that's a very vague term, but it could be like, hey, got on the phone with them and just couldn't get much back and forth, right? Send them a text and just not very responsive, or it's just not like, they're not drawn to necessarily the things we're drawn to, and that's okay, right? So we'll just move on. The second one for us is, can't shoot, don't recruit, right? So like, if that's what one of the big things that we're going to do, which we led the NCAA and made threes last year, if that's an equalizer for us, that we're going to extend the floor a little bit more, we're going to play a little bit more, quote unquote, gravity around it and spacing, then, if one of the tiebreakers could be, hey, two really good players, and one we project to be a 40% shooter and one we project to be a 35% shooter. And I will say this, let me add this. There's a lot of subjective terms we like to throw around in our industry, which I think, because of the subjectivity of them, we get ourselves in trouble a lot, right? We don't define the terms because they're so subjective. Good shooter might be the most generalized subjective term in the evaluation process that really kills us, right? We all go out on the road tomorrow. Well, you see a 6'10" guy make a three, and all of a sudden you're labeling him a good shooter. Well, then you go look at the stats in high school, he's 30%. Well, 30% in the way we play will probably get you beat, right? So like, when we're looking at good shooter, 35 to 40 in that assessment is a monster difference, right? Like, it's one of the few things you see translate from high school to college is the 3-point percentage. And so that's one from the basketball side of it. I think the personality side of it, we're going to talk to a bunch of different people around them. And then we just, like I said, we're constantly evaluating like we call them HBIs. Like, we're looking for high potential individuals. And then we've also identified some stuff internally that, hey, these are some things to look for, listen for, that would steer us away from that. And some of those are, I wouldn't say they're like 100%, but if we see 3 schools on the transcript, we're probably going to go a different direction. If we see 2 AAU teams in the same cycle, we're probably going to go a different direction. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's more just to protect the retention rate that we have, which is, I think, 7th in the country in the last 5 years. If you see a lot of movement, there could be reasons for all of it, right? Like, I was sitting there reading some stuff this morning actually on Enron, and like, I was reading all the explanations from the CEO and like all the justifications around it, right? And all the explanations for it. Couldn't take any responsibility for it. It doesn't matter what is happening. We as humans have an unbelievable way of justifying any decision we make. And so I think it's really important that you have filters where you don't just listen for the reason. You just say, hey, this is what we're going to do. We want to have a sustainable model that retains student athletes. So we're not going to make any decisions where we see any type of situation where it doesn't go that direction coming in here, just to protect ourselves. Not to say that, hey, there's something wrong there. It's more so just to protect what we're doing. And again, you can hear it as we talk about it, right? Like we're just funneling this thing down. And, but at the end of the day, we feel like we end up finding people that fit here well and they end up staying because of it.
Yeah, I love that. We're very similar in how we attack things as well. I always felt like the hardest part was getting your assistants to stay online with not gravitating towards talent only.
Yep.
I always felt like we come in that recruiting meeting in July, and the guy that you don't want to recruit plays well, is maybe a little bit more responsive now. They're like really like pushing. I always feel like that was like the real challenge. I love the ability. I love what you're talking about there with the personality testing, because I think that's something that's really unique. Again, like you, I think it's just a big part. It's a piece of the puzzle, but it doesn't give you everything. And I think the ability to use that, just because you just want to. It's weird. People think these kids so well by the time they commit to you. And even if you're filtering it out as deeply as you are, as deeply as we did, you still have a limited picture because you're not around them as much as you will be when you're coaching them. And so I think having that ability to try to filter out as much as possible just to give yourself the best chance makes so much sense. Why did you decide to start? You said you weren't a big fan of the profiling. What brought you along the side of it to thinking that it's more important now?
So I took, when COVID started during that quarantine period, I spent some time just by myself one day and I was like, hey, what are 3 or 4 things that I want to be a little bit more open-minded on, and just what I want to get out of this period where we're all going to be like in our houses, and like the whole idea, like how do you win this space, right? And so we all got on a bunch of Zooms. We all got in these relationships with people that like we didn't necessarily know or hadn't met. And I was on one call and I was speaking before Buzz Williams spoke, and it was on a Zoom format during quarantine. And he and I connected afterwards, and I never met him. We start talking, and he tells me about it. And
Buzz is like the best. I feel like,
yeah,
just in
like
terms of, he'll just reach out to you if he feels like you've given him something or he can give you something. And I don't think people realize that in our business. Like Buzz will just call you
he'll
and
just
just say,
call
"Hey
you.
man, I really like this."
Yeah, he'll just call you, and so we kind of connected. And so he tells me about Chad Brown, and so he was like, "Hey, just get on a Zoom with him, see what you think." So I get on a Zoom, and I listen to the whole deal. He actually assesses me, and then I kind of tuck it away, and I showed it to the staff, and the staff was like, "Wow, this thing really pegged you." And and it did. It was like, okay, this is interesting. And it was just so much broader than what I was used to. There was just so much more to it. But then I heard the price and I kind of tucked it away. And I was just like, I don't know if we can do that here at Furman. And so what was interesting, and this can kind of tie into a few other things program building wise, I think will be good for the audience. So we go play the next season, all right, quarantine season. And we lose a game at home that I didn't feel like we should have lost. And we had a lead. We were up 9 with about 10 to go. And it just was one of those situations where it put me in this position where I was thinking, okay, we got a month left of the season. There's a couple players that personality wise, I feel like I got to do a better job with. And it just made me think, you know what? Let me call Chad and let me see, instead of paying that astronomical rate, for the whole team, I'm going to ask him if he'll just a la carte a couple of our players that were older, just so I can make sure I did them right and that I finished out well with them. And because they were getting on those later stages of their career. And so sure enough, we agreed to it. He assessed a couple guys, and we were talking and going through it. And he said, okay, look, here's a couple things that I would advise you to do with one of these players. And this is non-basketball. This is what his personality says. Basically, it was a deal where Jamie, he gave me 3 things that were really good for me, that were non-basketball related. That was basically like, hey, look, if you yell at this guy, and if you come and see our practice, I mean, we try to pride ourselves on being in a teaching environment, and it's a very intense teaching environment. But he was just like, hey, if you point out his mistakes a lot, it's almost like hitting the gas pedal on a car that's in park. Okay, all you're going to do is just overheat the engine. He's already doing that to himself. He's already killing himself. So like, basically at the end of the day, you're just coming on here and you're just making it worse. And he said, instead, like, you need to take this guy to breakfast. Like, you need to just sit down in the meeting room and just 101, how's his mom? How's his dad? How's his girlfriend? And so I was like, all right, well, it's worth a shot. We'll see. So I started doing it. And all of a sudden, it's like he starts playing better. And he has basically an all conference month at the end of the season in that last month of February. Subconsequently, we start playing better. And one of our boosters that is somebody that, is in the financial wealth space, and he actually played here, was disconnected until we got hired. And now the last 5 years has been a huge supporter. He calls me, he's like, hey, what's going on? Why is he playing so much better? And I tell him, and he says, hey, look, I want to talk to that company. He's like, I want to bring him in here in our firm. So he not only goes and hires him for his business, then he calls me. He says, I want every player and I want every staff member assessed, and I'm gonna pay for it. And so now he writes the check for Chad Brown. And so it's one of those deals where we got into it, and then he's continued to support the cause of it. We've raised the money privately to be able to do it. And it's one of those situations where, again, program wise, right? I'm a big believer for all of us, that want to be head coaches or are head coaches, study business again. We keep going back to that. I read Super Pumped about a month ago, the story of Uber. If you want to see conviction on how much you have to continue, like the fundraising game never stops for us. Okay. Like you're never getting to a job where all of a sudden that's on the onus of the department. It's on the onus of the AD. Like that's not how big time CEOs do it. Why would we, right? We have this idea that like, oh, well, that's their job. The best fundraisers for our program are going to be us. The people that have the best vision and the best sell and the best ability to connect and excite people to actually give will be the actual staff. So you have to get all the way in on that. And that's something that we've done here. I mean, we've all the new offices, new locker rooms, it's all privately raised money. But it's an example right there, right? Like you can sit there and complain about it. Okay, why is he not playing well as last year? We don't have money to do this. Okay, well, man, it just is what he is. He's not buying in how we do it. And so it's just that idea, right? Like be open, listen, but at the end of the day, like aggressively try to not be problem centric, but to try to figure out solutions to things. And it's funny how a lot of those things can be circular, and you can end up, seeing a situation like that where you got a lot of different dynamics in one issue.
Yeah, it's amazing how the use of another person's perspective or expertise, right, can change. You made one probably small change, something that you were really capable of doing, but might have just been overlooking or just didn't realize the value of it. And it's amazing how that expertise can really change a person's trajectory and quickly. So kudos to you for being able to have that kind of conversation and also being open enough to listen. I mean, again, like you said, not a big fan of it. Buzz gives you a call. You think a little bit about it. Talk a little bit about this call from Buzz. Like just so people don't know how Buzz is when he calls you up like that. You talk a little bit about the convo with Buzz and how he kind of jumps you on the line.
Well, like I said, I've yet, still to this day, Buzz and I have not face to face met. Hopefully that will change in this July period. I think he's fascinating. I think that, going back to the assessments with Chad Brown, like for me personally, when they ranked the values, wisdom was number 2 for me. So I love information. I love just anything, right? Like, reading podcasts, just ideas. I love it. I crave it. And Buzz is similar, right? Like Buzz just loves information. So the two of us, when we got on the phone, it was just the idea of like, and listen, let's just be honest. Like the business doesn't like it because the business wants you to conform, right? The business wants replicators. The business wants conformists, right? Like this is how we've always done it. Like, oh, they kind of have their way. And it's just like, I mean, if you really, again, and I know I keep kind of paralleling what I'm talking about here with, the business world, but differentiators are the companies that go out and do transformational things. The replicators don't, right? The replicators are always chasing. The differentiators are the ones that find solutions to problems that nobody could figure out, right? And so I've always taken pride in like, I want to be different, not for the sake of like, we want to just be over here on our own on an island, but like, if you're going to win here, like Steve Spurrier said it really well in South Carolina, like, hey, we're going to have to be different to line up and go win this thing in the situations that we're in. And so Buzz just kind of, he radiated that to me a little bit as we were talking and, got on a couple of Zooms and he's calling me in the morning and I'd reach out to him and book notes here and, hey, this speaker here. And what about this here? it was just something with my personality and his personality. We started talking about like the COVID deal, and then the NIL stuff was coming down the pipe, and it was just refreshing for me to hear like a completely, it wasn't the same rehearsed answer, like like NIL space right now, right? Like, oh man, this is the worst thing, and the portal, this is the worst thing. Like, no, it's just the current thing. Okay. So like none of us are changing it. So how does it fit your model where you're at in a situation where you can use it in a way that can be advantageous? Spend your time in those thoughts. And I enjoyed it. And I got on his mailing list, and he sends me all this. And when he sends me something, I always read it or I always listen to it. And it's just been, again, a neat relationship that, if it wasn't just profiling of itself, they were on campus last week. Chad and his assistant were here, like going through a bunch of profiles with us. Like, that's a relationship that started through COVID, that was directed through Buzz. And, it's amazing how that stuff can happen in the course of a career.
Yeah, he's just so great at stuff like that, like reaching out and like kind of ask you a ton of questions. I think when he first starts talking, you're like, is this guy working me some to get information about what we're doing? But he always does it in such a genuine way. And then, he contributes, you know what I mean? Like sometimes someone will call you and they'll kind of just try to work you for information, but they don't contribute. I think he's a big time contributor. Like, anytime I have like some major, like a big decision to make, I honestly, I usually reach out to him, and I talk to him probably 5 or 6 times a year and text him occasionally, but he's just a great person to connect with. And he loves when you share with him, and you kind of build that relationship. Anyone else in this business that you really feel like you've connected with that's really been able to influence you and help you?
Well, it's it's a lot. Like I said, I love information, so I crave it, I seek it. And Lenny Acuff's somebody that has been tremendous for me. He was at UAH, actually interviewed for the job here when Jeff Jackson got let go, and he and I got to know each other during that process. And I started watching his teams, and I was fascinated with it. I was fascinated with the connectivity of it, the how well they played together, but how they utilized tempo and space, but also so like sewn in some Princeton concepts to where it wasn't super rigid, but it was like, man, this is fast, this is fun, this is free. And so I'll be honest, this is probably interesting. Like, for all the aspiring head coaches, you'll be in a similar situation. So I was in a unique spot. I was here for 4 years, and we played a certain way, and we had 4 seniors that were going to be a part of our first team here. And we were basically doing the Brad Underwood stuff my last year here as an assistant. And I think we were averaging about 67 a game. We defended really well and just kind of grinded you out. And again, the conventional answer is, hey, you're getting these 4 seniors, you're taking over this team, they've been winning. Like, just keep doing what you've been doing. And I really fought it, like I fought it. I knew how I wanted to play. I knew the things that I felt like had created success here, and I wanted to continue those. But I thought we could increase the scoring, and I thought we could increase the pace a little bit. And I remember the day I was sitting in my office where I was just like, you know what? If I'm going to go down, like, and I'm going to get fired in this deal, at least I'm going to say I tried it my way. And so I called Lenny and I said, hey, I think offensively I want to play very similar. And the thing about this business, I'm close with a lot of football coaches. I probably study football as much, if not more, than the college basketball aspect of like organizational structure, recruiting, and different things. They're just so much more open. Like we're so secretive. Like, it's just like nobody wants to really share. Like, they want to throw some generalizations out, but they don't want to really share because it's the idea of scarcity. Like, if I help somebody else, that's actually going to hurt me, instead of this principle of abundance of like, hey, like, just because we share doesn't mean I'm going to be less successful. In fact, probably makes it to where I'm going to be more successful. You develop a network of people that you can share ideas with. And so Lenny, like, literally, I'll never forget it. He came down to Greenville for 2 days, and we sat in the meeting room, just he and I, and we just went through not only offensive things, but like all the head coaching experience that he went through and things that I was going to have to deal with. And that was huge for me. And to open that relationship to where I could call him and go through different things with him. And he's been incredible for me. I mean, he's one of those that, like, when you got a really big decision to make, I'm always gonna call him for sure. Studying people, this is probably documented. I still do it. I was an assistant every offseason. I would take one team from the beginning of the season to the end, and not clips. Like, I watched the full game, full season, and a lot of data that I had from that really shaped me, from watching Beelon's team at Michigan, watching Rick Bird's teams at Belmont, watching Tony Bennett's team at Virginia defensively, watching Jay Wright's teams at Villanova from a spacing, playoff penetration, skill development type process. And then Jamion, I'm not afraid to call anybody. Like, I Dabo Sweeney, in terms of how he did it, has done it at Clemson. There's a lot of parallels from the relationship piece, from the culture piece. We had a common friend. I reached out to that common friend. They connected us. The next thing I know, I'm out there having a 3-hour dinner with Coach Sweeney 5 years ago, and it's turned into a great friendship that he's been able to help me in a lot of different ways. So, like, I think that a lot of times we're afraid to ask. I think it's the ego in us, right? Hey, we got to project that we have all the answers. And I think for me, going back to wanting information, I'm just comfortable in just saying, hey, you know what? I really like what you do here. We don't have this figured out. I would really love to explore this. Are you willing to talk about it? Can you help? People love helping, for the most part. Some people can kind of shy away from it, but I think in this business, to be comfortable asking, but then also, like you talked about, I think when you get inside that relationship, you got to look at it as a bank account, right? Like, you got to make sure there's withdrawals for sure, but you also got to deposit. And what wears you out when you get in this position where people start saying, hey, we want to know this or we want to know that, like, they're not depositing anything. They're just trying to withdraw. So, like, those relationships can bring a tax and a strain that are very hard to sustain. But if you can get one of those relationships where you feel like the withdrawals and deposits are going both ways and you're helping one another, I think that's where you can really grow. You can really help each other, and then you can also have a little bit of a connectivity to navigate a very challenging business.
Yeah, and I think, as a head coach, you always feel like you're slightly alone, because you're the only one in that building that's even thinking, 3 years down the road, 4 years down the road. Like, the decision you make on who you put on blue team today in practice is going to influence how they operate next week, which may influence 2 years, which may influence now recruiting. So, but you're the only person in that chair that can really think that way. So having a community of people that you can trust really does matter to impact and just how you operate. I had a guy, Nathan Davis, who's a head coach at Bucknell, who I actually worked with at Bucknell when we were assistants together. And he's always a guy, like, I'm like, you and I are probably pretty similar, honestly, where we're like, I want this, I want it this way, I want it done. And, he would call me my first year and I'd be like, man, I'd be a little upset about something. He goes, Jamion, it is June 1st. All right. He would just kind of say, it's June 1st, you guys are going to get there. And so having those kind of people that have had success that maybe give you a different perspective really, really does matter. I love it. And I appreciate you sharing that. When you're, one thing that I thought you guys were elite at was really recruiting. You guys just did an amazing job of assessing that. So I'm glad you're able to go into that some. Now, you're doing an amazing job there. When you talk about doing it your way and kind of changing that style of play, what was the ultimate factor with it? Was it your personnel? Was it your mindset as a coach? Was it the personnel you thought you could attract at Furman? What was the kind of defining factor to make you decide to change up the style of play just slightly enough to kind of propel where you've been now?
Well, again, it was mainly one of those deals of, like, when I played the game, I thought games were more fun when you scored a lot of points. They just were. And this idea that, are we offensive minded or are we defensive minded? Are you an offensive coach or a defensive coach? Like, hey, this isn't football. Okay. It's just not. Like, this isn't baseball. We're not doing any changes. Like, the game is a constant flow of both. And one thing that I really thought about before I'd ever coached a game is this idea of, like, I want to be complete. I don't want to be offense or defense. I want our team to be complete. And it was right at the time, 5 years ago, the Warriors, I think, had just won it again. And everybody was just talking about how, the 3-point shooting and the offense and all this. but like inside of their defensive efficiency was incredible, right? And so we were at that point, if you go back and look at like the 16-17 season, it was a three-way tie for the league. And we were incredible defensively. I mean, we would just absolutely guard you. And offensively, like I said, I think it was 66, 67 points a game. And it was really just like, hey, can we keep defending at a high level, which in the last 5 years, we've been at least top three defensively, which that doesn't get talked about a lot because it's, everybody talks about our offense. But we've been top three in defense. And I think 2 of those years we finished first defensively. And so how do we get more complete? Well, it was obvious. It was like, well, we got to get offense better. And so how do we get offense better, but not ignore what we've done to build Furman, right? So the ball movement, regardless of what we were running, has gotten way better, right? The team concept of basketball, like sharing the ball, moving the ball. I thought we had pretty good movement, but could we get the tempo a little faster? Could we score a few more points? And I thought the way we were going to have to do that was to create not more threes. We're going to have to create more layups. And so it was really just that push that I wanted to explore something that was like very similar in terms of the components that led to the success, but then maybe could we expand there a little bit? And what's funny is, and we talk about like the coaching circle, right? Here's the neat thing about it is as we did it, the circle of friends and Lenny, and then everything that Nico Medved had done for me and everything that Nico had taught me from a culture, from a defensive standpoint. Well, now 2 years ago, like Colorado State, they went to this, right? So it went completely full circle to where he kind of stayed basic at Drake, which was the Underwood stuff. And then they did it at Colorado State at first. Well, now the last 2 years, we've all just kind of gone into this flow. So in COVID, I mean, just like we're doing now, it's Lenny, Nico, myself, and we're on Zooms, and we all have similar beliefs, and we all love ball movement, and we all love the synergy of the game when 5 guys touch the ball. And so now it's created even a better like group think to where we can all help one another out. And that's being open-minded, right? That's not having egos. That's depending on one another. And because look, we're still playing defensively the same way Nico taught me, right? Like a lot of the things that we do from a value standpoint of me watching him come in here, probably after a lot of his experience with 10 miles and turning around Colorado State and understanding, like you go through that thought as an assistant, like we all go through this. And I know I went through it. Like when I was first an assistant, it's like, hey, it is the Jimmies and the Joes. Like you better go get players. And then you're kind of in the business for a little while. And then you see these coaches that kind of have their way and you're like, oh, you know what? The real separator is like the coaching. Like these coaches are like phenomenal. And so then you kind of change. And then there's this enlightenment that at some point in your career, it just kind of goes off and you're like, you know what? It's both. Like it's both. And so you better have really good players, but you better have really good processes. And so it's people and process. And I think that's what's been good for me, like going through that offensive change. It allowed me to explore a level of creativity that I wanted. It allowed me to change, and like now it's not, well, y'all do this or y'all do that. Like we're like a hodgepodge, and I spend a lot of our summers trying to figure out ways to not change, but adapt, because now 5 years ago, not many people were playing like this. Well, now 5 years later, I mean, you see a lot of people trying to do this either out of set or they're doing it, it's a little bit of what they're doing. It's not a lot, but we're having to adapt a little bit because now people have guarded a little bit more. So each summer we're trying to find 2 or 3 things that we can be a little bit more innovative with, which is the space we want to be in. We don't want to ever be in wholesale changes. We want to really be focused on innovation and how we can adapt through innovation each year and trying to find a couple unique concepts that we can continue to be able to be in situations where people are guarding us in ways that maybe they don't have to guard people typically on a given night.
Yeah, which is a great reason why you can afford to share. When you share, people give you information and give you something that maybe you're not thinking of that you can then go and attack it. But also there's always levels to people learning what you do. So although you may share a concept, the ability of that person, that program to be able to go and do that on day one, they're still going to have this process they're going to have to go to. So although you can share, you're still going to be ahead of the knowledge base because you've already kind of had some of those, you've already had to learn some of those lessons. And that's why I'm always been a big believer in sharing. There's nothing wrong in sharing, because they're going to give you something that maybe you're just not thinking of or not on your purview right then, and you're still going to be able to help them.
Well, and then how selfish is it, right? Like, I mean, if it's not for, what Nico Medved taught me, if it's not for what Lenny Acuff taught me, if it's not for the things I've learned, from afar and watching this Clemson football model that's just elite, and, the information they've given me from recruiting to culture, like I've leaned on people, right? Like, and people have taught me. So me to have an unwillingness to go back and help and share others would be, at the end of the day, it's just, whether we want to frame it that way or not, it's a very selfish act.
Yeah.
And it's this idea that we discovered all this, right? And we've contributed to it, and we've changed it, and we tweaked it, but it's not copyrighted information. And so if I'm going to ask people to help us, and I'm going to lean on different people, then I've also got to, going back to that whole withdrawals and credits, right? Like deposits, like I've got to be willing in our business to be able to deposit in other people's program to show them that I'm willing to help in ways that others are willing to help me.
Yeah. Well, tell me a little bit. I got two things for you. The first time you get invited to have dinner with Dabo Sweeney, what are you thinking? And, how excited are you going through that experience?
Well, that goes back to people as well. So when I was an assistant here, the director of operations for football was a guy named Jordan Souls. So Jordan and I got really close. And Jordan he's like a brother to me. I mean, we're best friends, and our wives are friends. I mean, it's a very close relationship. Well, he gets hired to go over there while I'm still an assistant here to work on that football staff. And, it was just one of those things. When I got the job, he said, "Hey, look, obviously he's really busy, but you two have a lot of similarities in what you believe in and how you're going to do it." How he got the job as an assistant, being known as a recruiter, how you got the job as an assistant, being known as a recruiter. I think this would be a really good, if anything, just to connect you guys. And he called me, Jordan did, and he said, "Hey, come out to practice this afternoon." And he said he'll try to have a few minutes for you. And man, it was the wildest day. I go out there, watch practice. I get to meet him. We talk for like 5 minutes, and I was sitting there thinking, if that's all I get out of this, it was completely worth it. I get to watch practice. I saw the facility. I got to ask a bunch of recruiting questions. And sure enough, after practice, he came and talked to me more. And we were standing there talking, and all of a sudden, like the SID comes up and is like, "Coach, hey, you have media." And he's like, "Oh, I got media tonight." And we look over about 20 yards down the way. He's got a whole media pool waiting on him. And he grabs me. He's like, "Hey, come on." And so we go over there, and he lets me partake in his media circle. And I hadn't coached a game yet. And he's like, "Hey, we got the new Furman basketball coach here, and he's out here trying to learn and grow. And, ask him a couple questions. Let's get in there." And it was one of those deals. You're like, what is going on? And so we get done. He's like, "Hey," and at this point, it's like 7:00 at night. And he's like, "Hey, are you in a hurry? You got to go?" And I was like, "No, sir." And I text my wife, and I was like, "Hey, I'll be a little late." "Hey, you're good." And so he's like, "Hey, everybody's going to go eat in the facility. You want to come eat with us? Come on." And so we go eat dinner. And the next thing I know, he's going through hiring. He's going through culture. He's going through mistakes he's made. He's going through anything he could think of that he could give me. And I think I left the facility at 11:00 at night. And, it's just one of those deals where it was incredible. And again, me figuring out ways, what can I send him? Right? Like, I don't know. He probably not a lot, but is there something I could show him? And I remember I wrote him a note, and I thanked him, and then I threw some book notes in there. And then I had a book that I really like, and I sent it to him, and, I just thanked him. And the next thing I know, he had written me back, and actually, no, what he did was he texted me back. He was on the way to the airport for the Louisville football game, and he texted me back, and he said, "Thanks for the book notes. Can't wait to read this book. Appreciate you sharing." And sure enough, it was, he reached out to me, and I had his cell number. And then it was one of those things where we just kind of going back and forth. And I've just tried to, I don't bug him. He's got a very intense schedule, obviously, but I try to make sure that I'm participating to some extent, right? If I do reach out, that through the course of the year, if there's something I see, if there's a video, if there's something that I can share with him, these people at the top of the top, I think sometimes we kind of misshoot that they need people that they feel like that they can connect with as well, and that people aren't just saying, well, you know what, don't bother them. They want stuff too. You know what I mean? Like they want to feel like that people are willing to share ideas and discuss things. And so we've gotten in a bunch of different discussions. I mean, just from the transfer portal to, the idea that he more so framed, but the idea of finding people that are willing to bloom where they're planted and to doing it through real development. So Paul Journey that they have there, that's where we basically tailored the Further the Man program that we have here, which systematic leadership development program that we do all year that, presentation, communication, service, leading, lifelong learning, 25 speakers last year. Like, it's coordinating and seeing, hey, what are they doing at that level that's so high, that's unbelievable, that maybe we, with a lesser budget, right, with less resources, how can we potentially do that here and not just say, well, hey, that's Clemson, right? Well, no, there's a model, right? There's a way that we can still adapt some of that. And man, to be 40 minutes down the road and to see what they've been able to do and how they've done it and the conviction of which they've done it with. I'll tell you this, and then I'll get off of this, but this is good, okay? And I think this is, for anybody listening that wants to be a head coach one day, this is something that stayed with me and I think could have been a major mistake had I not taken this advice. One thing he told me, and he probably doesn't even remember telling me this, but it was so big for me to hear because it was August when I first met him. And I'd gone April 7th to August listening to everybody tell me that I was going to have to change. Oh, it's about to change for you, Bob. Like, this thing's about to change. Okay. Like, I know how you are. Like, you're close with players and like, you have guys to your house and like, you do this thing and like guys that work with me. I mean, like, oh man, it's about to be different. Okay. Like you're going to have to build in this insulation, like you're the head coach now. And I mean, I must have heard this, Jamion, at least 30 times, right?
It's amazing how often you hear that.
and we were outside and we were still on the field when he told me this. And he goes, hey, man, and y'all, everybody knows how coach is. He's like, hey, I know what everybody's telling you. Everybody's telling you got to change. He's like, you better not believe any of that mess. He said, because everything you did to this point that got you the job to be in the position you are to be a head coach at 34, it's all because of that stuff. And if you quit relating and you quit connecting and you stop being close to those players and you stop having them to your house, well, guess what? All that stuff that made you probably decent at what you were as an assistant, you just eliminated all that. And he's like, don't believe any of that nonsense. He said, you stay who you are because who you are is the reason that you're currently a head coach. And I remember the freedom of hearing that, because it was to me, it was like, man, I feel like I'm losing a part of my soul if I literally have to change my being. And I just remember thinking, you know what, I'm going to do that. Like, I'm going to try to just be different. And still, I mean, Sunday night, we had all three newcomers at our house, right? I had my two kids at the table. My wife was at the table. Like, they go out and shoot baskets. They're out there playing catchphrase with my kids. Like, that's 2022, middle of June. Like, that's what we're doing. And it is different. You know what I mean? But like, I feel like that's a big part of the retention. Everybody's saying, well, how did Mike and Slaw come back? Everybody in the country probably wanted them. I think over time, just being comfortable and like, we are different and we're going to be okay with that. And we're not going to be conventional, but we're not saying that the way we do it is the only way, but we are ascribing to the fact that the way we do it is the only way for us.
Right.
And we want to constantly try to make sure that we have that type of exclusivity to it, not out of a mindset of arrogance, but a mindset of like language and differentiators bring exclusivity. And then to me, exclusivity then brings buy-in. If you don't have something that's exclusive, who wants it? Right? Like right. Who wants the replicated version of something? Who buys the shoes that everybody has, right? Who gets this that everybody has, right? What's everybody chasing? My 12-year-old, my 10-year-old, right?
Yeah.
Exclusivity.
Yeah, and so I always tell people, you go to the club on Saturday night, and the one that has everybody standing around the corner is one that everybody wants to go to, and then you get in there and it's like nobody in there, right? Yep. I mean, they're just building exclusivity, and everything they're doing.
And that's the thing. I think it makes you nervous, okay? And I think that's where the conviction in our business comes from. But like, you've got to decide, right? Like, what are going to be the exclusive factors of your program that when you go to sell your program and you ask people to be a part of it, that they're going to buy in because they're going to align with those things that are exclusive. And I think every situation, every institution, every coaching staff, those are different, right? Those can be unique, but I think that's where the courage and the conviction comes in, that you better identify those. And as you do it, then now you're going to get to a point where in recruiting, I mean, we had 8 recruits on campus last week, and I sat down with every single one of them in my office on the first meeting. I said, this is who we are. Okay. We are different, and it's okay if you're not, but this thing, our recruiting is usually takes the form of a capital Y. Okay. You're going to come up and you're going to get to this visit, and then it's either going to go this direction or it's going to go this direction. Yeah. And we're completely okay with that. And when you leave here, you're going to usually say, hey, you know what? That's a different conversation that I've heard. And you're either going to love it and you're going to say, hey, I want that, or you're going to say, hey, you know what? That's not for me. And that's going to be completely okay. And, that's probably the biggest thing I've taken away from him. And I think you look at it, what they've done, what they've done with transfers, what they've done, even June recruiting, that's been documented here in the papers here recently. He's always been kind of against bringing guys in officially. He adapted this offseason. They had one weekend where they did June officials. They brought in, 20 kids, and they had a great success with it. So I think The Athletic, you can go on and see different articles about how he adapted. But identity, being convicted in how you do it, but then willing to adapt and innovate through that. That's been one of my biggest takeaways there, and realizing that you don't have to sacrifice your character in being authentic and being true to yourself in order to be successful.
I love everything about it. I'm gonna leave you with this. On the last call, we do this thing here. You got 2 seats at your table. You got to take a person who's retired, and you got to take a person who's still actively working. What 2 people are you taking?
And I'm assuming we're talking coaching.
It can be anything. It can be basketball. It can be anything.
Right now, currently, wow, I'd want a bunch at the table. That's to narrow that down. That's a good question. Yeah, retired. I would probably, just since it's so fresh, it would be Jay Wright. Just since it's like, this is like fresh and right now, just to get his thoughts on, hey, what's your current perspective on all this? And then the other one, I guess this would be retired too. So I'd say Steve Spurrier, would be somebody I've always wanted to have a conversation with. And because it's, for me, like I grew up in Columbia, and I watched him come and change South Carolina football. And you talk about being different. I mean, he was just completely comfortable being different. So I guess I failed there. Let me think of somebody that's currently working. You know what? Not in basketball. I would bring Elon Musk to the table. That's what I would do.
I love it.
Yeah, I would bring Elon Musk. I think just innovation, current issues, solving problems. And man, I mean, again, you just look at everything he's done with space and Tesla and all this stuff. I mean, you talk about not being afraid to stand out. That would be crazy. Steve Spurrier, Elon Musk, and Jay Wright at the table, huh? I asked for 3. I guess
we'll give you an extension. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. Every time I read something about Elon Musk, I'm thinking like, what is this guy thinking? No doubt. And I would love to know how he processes things, how he works through things. I think those are excellent guests. Well, Bob, man, I appreciate you taking the time. You've been an outstanding guest for us. Speakeasy, we really appreciate you taking the time and sharing with coaches and everyone around. I'm looking forward to catching up with you soon. Thank you for taking the time.
That sounds good. Appreciate it.
We'll talk soon. Thanks, Bob. Thank you for joining us on The Last Call, powered by Speakeasy, where careers grow through relationships and relationships grow through Speakeasy. We hope you enjoyed it, and we look forward to connecting with you soon.